Hey there, thank you for clicking on the video and supporting the channel. If you want to support the channel even further, as well as see videos early and see videos that I can't release on YouTube, then you can check them out over on Patreon. Patreon is just a way for people to support the channel more, as well as me be able to give them something back in return. If you're interested, there will be a link down in the description below, as well as up in the corner. Thank you. Most films are a combination of different genres: romance and drama, action and sci-fi, drama and biopic, romance and comedy, you get the point. But arguably one of the most common and the most used formats is action and comedy. There's just something about action films that lend itself so well to comedy. Maybe it's because it balances out the violence so the audience doesn't become too desensitized to people getting punched in the face. Or maybe it's because people watch action films to have a good time, and comedy tends to lend itself the perfect partner to it. Whatever the case may be, this is a classic pairing that has been used since Charlie Chaplin. The only problem is, since it's so widespread, it kinda died. At least the art of it did. Let me explain. Action comedies, in my opinion, are more than just saying a joke, having a cool action scene with a verbal one-liner, rinse, repeat, and film. A good action comedy film will set up interesting and comical action sequences that our characters are thrown into with lots of visual comedy gags and flair. Unfortunately, a style of action films was popularized by a massive new player in the film scene that nearly killed off this art form of doing action films. Before I say anything, overall, I like the Marvel films. Some more than others, sure, but as a whole, I'm hard-pressed to find a more enjoyable series of movies this long. The problem comes from repetition and copying. It's the same issue I brought up in the Puss in Boots video. You can check that one out over here. When something is successful in the film industry does what it does best: copy and paste, over and over in a lazy attempt to cash grab in on the fad. Marvel's approach to the genre was admittedly faithful to the comics that inspired them. Throw a couple of quips back and forth, fight the bad guys or each other, punch each other for a while, and then ultimately good prevails. Minus one film, but that's not the point. Minus Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor Ragnarok, Infinity War, there wasn't really much creativity or interesting things to the action outside of super people doing super things, and I think that's why the newest phase of Marvel has lacked so much. Which, all of this by itself in a vacuum isn't a problem. The problem comes when the entire action comedy genre is nothing but a couple of people throwing one-liners at each other, throwing a couple of punches, film over. But hasn't it always been like this? I absolutely love Edgar Wright. I think he is one of the most creatively boundary-pushing directors in the film industry right now. His films have some of the most creative action sequences in movies, period. And it also helps that they are hilariously shot, written, and acted out. A personal favorite of mine would have to be Scott Pilgrim vs. Matthew Patel in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. It's an absurd fight in an absurd movie, but it works so well, and it just makes you laugh during the entire ridiculous fight. From the clever editing and camera angles used to the funny banter, the choreography, the visual gags, everything just works. Another wonderful example would be the ending action sequence of Hot Fuzz. Everything about how this scene is put together just oozes style and charm. From a high level, it all melds together to show how ridiculous the situation is and how funny it is that's being portrayed. And it's just damn funny. Okay, that's just one director. What are some other examples? Jackie Chan. Arguably one of the most important figures in action comedy, Jackie Chan is one of the founding fathers of the genre, in my opinion. Just take the fight from Drunken Master, for example. There really isn't much banter back and forth, but the whole scene is just hysterical. From the weird kick thing to Jackie drinking too much and needing to take a break mid-fight to vomit, to Jackie walking off to break a box for no reason mid-fight. The whole scene is just so funny without the need of any one-liners or terrible jokes. It's all shown visually, and all of the jokes are directly from the action that's happening on the screen and the absurdity of it. Now, when I think action comedy movies are at their best, it's when they combine the smart, dry, witty banter from Marvel style with hysterical fight scenes, setups, and framings, which was kind of lost for a long time. Sure, there was a few attempts here or there, but minus the nice guys, they all felt kind of artificial. I wasn't sure if we would get another movie that embodied why action comedy can be so good. And then Bullet Train happened. Now, I'll admit, I'm late to the hype train, and the only reason I watched this movie was because my girlfriend wanted me to watch it with her, and I am so glad I did. Bullet Train has a really stupid premise. Assassins from all over the world get stuck on a train together, and they all duke it out until the last man standing. There are so many problems with this premise. When working with a large cast, they can all feel samey, and it can be hard to set up and distinguish each one of them as a unique and interesting character. Since all of the action is going to take place on one bullet train, it can come off as a knockoff John Wick or Jason Bourne, all hand-to-hand fights in close spaces. And with this many characters, how are you going to care about any of them, let alone remember them after the credits roll? Bullet Train beat all of the odds with 3 simple concepts: tone, writing, and framing. The tone of the movie is a fever dream. That is the best way I can describe it. The tone of the movie skirts the line between absurd comedy movie, think Hot Fuzz, Scott Pilgrim, etc., and more serious drama movies, think Jason Bourne, and it dances that line beautifully, with some side stories and moments making you burst out laughing at just how ridiculous everything is going on right now, and others ripping your heart out and stomping on it. Which leads into the writing. This movie is written so well. Okay, I'll grant you, there is a section towards the end of the film that lags a bit, but the character development work that they did in this movie is so good that it makes you actually give a damn about these stupid characters. And it is phenomenal how simple and effective it is. Another wonderful thing about the writing in this movie is how snappy and witty the dialogue is. I mean, this is Monty Python levels of insanity.
Jones is sophisticated.
Oh, now he's calling him fruit sophisticated. You look like every white homeless man I've ever seen.
Okay.
I find it very hard to follow the story.
My point is, that door is closing.
Yet, even in the absurd comedy of this movie, it manages to tell an effective story of family with the twins. There is some other side plots that are still interesting, like the Elder and his family and the White Death to an extent, but the twins are, in my opinion, the heart of the movie. And finally, the most important thing about this movie, in my opinion, the framing. Which I'm probably not using that term right. I don't know what else to call it. It's the same thing that Jackie Chan used so effectively all those years ago, taking a fight scene and turning it into something more. When he's attacked by the wolf, Ladybug isn't trying to hurt him. He's just trying to figure out what his problem is. When he and Lemon get into a scuffle, it's in the quiet car where there's a Karen who keeps telling them to be quiet. After fighting for a bit with Tangerine and trying to get him to stop, they get broken up by a stewardess who asks them if they would like some refreshments. Ladybug asks for water, sees that it's in a plastic bottle, eyes a glass bottle of sparkling water instead and asks for that, makes Tangerine pay for it, and then again asks him if he's cool to just talk things out, and when he's not, he just chucks the glass bottle at his head and they keep fighting. Every fight scene is so brilliant in its premise, hook, and gimmick and execution that you can't help but laugh at every moment. And it's not just the action sequences either. Every obstacle and moment along the way is so creative and stupid, but framed in just the right way to make it ridiculous, funny, and memorable. Is it a bit pretentious of me to call this the rebirth of action comedy? Yes, but I needed a snappy YouTube title, and I'm terrible at coming up with one. Bullet Train is what I will be pointing people to as an example of how to do action comedy right. On paper, this film shouldn't work. This should be terrible. But because of how it's framed and executed, it is one of the funniest action comedies in recent years, all because of how it's framed. Is it the best movie ever made? No. Am I going to rewatch this movie over and over and over again because I love it? Yes. And I think that is the important thing about an action comedy movie. Special thank you to Ian Etzep, Gabe Helmuth, Mustafa Rond, Mafnar, and Brandon Roy, who are all pledged at the executive level over on Patreon. Again, if you're interested in the Patreon, there'll be a link down below.